Welcome. Thank you for joining us on tonight's EGA webcast, our final webcast before Garden States. And gosh, upgrading things, new monitors, and they don't want to play nice. I don't need to tell you about that though, because what I'd like to talk to you about tonight is what we have coming up for tonight's webcast and what we have coming up for Garden States. So Wombajeka, welcome. This is episode 20 of our Garden States monthly microdose webcast, and I am broadcasting tonight from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and would like to pay my respects and EGA's respects to elders past and present, as well as anyone who might be tuned in today. And also I'd like to recognise that we benefit from the knowledge and insights of First Nations people here in Australia and around the world. My name is Nick Wallace. I'm the co-founder of the Australian Psychedelic Society, producer of the former 3CR program and Psychedelia. And I have also spent the past decade volunteering and working in harm reduction with the Dancewise program in a variety of capacities over my time. Thank you all again for joining us on this live webcast tonight. As I mentioned, our final one over a lot longer period than we expected before we will be able to see you in person. These were created during our rather extensive lockdown here in Victoria. And at first we were heading towards our Garden States event, which was to be in December last year. And, I'm pretty sure there was also, thoughts of a 2019. There's been a lot of plans that have been delayed, as I'm sure everyone is aware. And still now we have events that are being postponed and delayed because now it's flooding everywhere. But it isn't going to flood at Garden States. We are in a nice, safe location away from the water. So do join us there. Garden States is 5 weeks away, December 2nd till 4th. If you don't have tickets, there are a very limited few left, and you could pick one up by heading to the EGA website. Make sure as well that since we are live tonight, drop in the chat what lands you're on. We would love to know. Share what lands, what First Nations lands you're on. Good way to introduce yourself. Let us know a little bit about yourself. And if you do have comments or questions during tonight's presentation, drop them in there. Our moderators will be watching and will be ready to throw those over to our Q&A. And if you haven't clicked like or subscribe already to the EGA channel, make sure you do so. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And same goes if you're watching this back later. EGA provides opportunities for critical thinking and knowledge sharing at that meeting ground between plants, fungi, mind, and culture. EGA embraces the psychedelic in the broadest sense of the word, with science, culture, policy, and in nurturing the grassroots community that holds all of this together. And they've been doing that for 20 odd years now, and have a lot of successes to call from it. And Garden States is the perfect place to see all of that on display. Just a couple of things first. Now, yep, that's going to work like that. Oh, subscribe to the newsletter. Newsletter is always a good place to receive all the latest updates. It's also where you will see updates about some last minute announcements for Garden States. And I'm going to talk about a few of those in just a tick. As I said, 2nd till 4th, so just on 5 weeks away. It is the first weekend of December, so do head along if you don't have a ticket already. There are also web stream tickets, online tickets, if you would like to join in that capacity, if you're not in Melbourne, or if you're unable to make it to Melbourne, or if the tickets sell out and you still want to get a little taste of Garden States. One of the announcements is the Conservation and Fungi Culture Masterclass, which is with our resident mycologist, Kane Barlow. That will be on the Friday of the event from 12:30 till 5:30. It's very limited in the number of participants because you get really hands-on experience. So make sure to book that if you are one of those people who would like to have that experience. The after party. You can't have a conference without an after party on December 4th, the Sunday, from 7:30 p.m. Up in the hills in Belgrave at Suki Lounge. There will be an after party. It's also a fundraiser for EGA, so do come along and help us out. And it'll be good fun, good time to socialise in a a bit more of a loose capacity. $10 pre-sale, $15 on the door, and we would love to see you there. That's all of those ones. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the EGA websites just to mention a couple of things as well. So, what have we got? Well, that's the booking page for Kane's conservation and fungi culture masterclass. So you can find that on the EGA website. Oh, there I am. That's the booking page for the after party. But if you are savvy enough and you head onto the website and you look down at the 2022 conference, some of the panels are now available for you to have a look at. So I'll just quickly scroll through them. I'm not going to go into them all. You can do that yourself in another tab. Maybe you've got another monitor that works nicely for you. And also the EGA raffle tickets are going to be on sale for that very soon. But if you are somebody that has something, perhaps you have a business or you happen to grow some interesting plants, and you would like to make a donation to EGA's efforts, you can still make a donation. Donate Now is the place to go. So again, it's appearing all over the place. Hi. So tonight, we've got a lot of announcements. It's only like 5 weeks away. So one of the last minute announcements that just went out today is Dr. David Luke, who will be speaking on DMT, Indigenous Gateway to the Soul and Endogenous Reality Thermostat. That's the name of his talk. And it should be an interesting one. I'm having a look here. Look, you can have a look on the website, or I think an email went out recently. If not, subscribe to that newsletter and you will get that pretty soon. And also Lily K. Ross, PhD, who holds a PhD in feminism and ethics research, and is the ethics research fellow at Symposia. She was also the creator and producer of New York Magazine's Cover Story Power Trip podcast series, which is a really interesting look from a slightly different angle into the world of psychedelics, especially the political and ethical angles that have been coming up a lot more as we move forth in this psychedelic renaissance. So Lily will also be speaking at the conference. But tonight, for episode 20, we are going to welcome shortly Melissa Warner and Dr. Lani Roy, who will provide a review of the neurological, physiological, and psychological, social, and community impact of trauma, including barriers to growth and how the self internalises this trauma. The duo will discuss creating safety in self and others through boundaries, community connection, reclaiming and growing identity, compassionate self-inquiry, and attunement to the self and nature. So I'd like to welcome both Lani and Melissa now. And thank you for joining us. Make sure to drop those questions into the chat. Welcome.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, EGA and community, for being here tonight. Yeah, really excited to present post-traumatic growth with psychedelics. Next slide. We'll just take a moment, if you feel comfortable enough, you may even like closing your eyes, just to drop into this space together as we acknowledge the incredible country that we're on and the traditional owners of the lands. As we do this, you may like to remember a specific piece of land in Australia that is really dear to you. Might be a water body, a mountain, the bush, a garden. It's an incredible country that we've got access to, and really honouring the traditional owners that hold those songlines, those spaces. And just knowing that if the world is ever getting you down and the human form and trauma is getting big, we can connect to country and connect to the natural world. And just acknowledging the incredible altars of medicine, people having ceremony by fire in the teepee, the jungle, medicine moving to the clinics, and incredible recreation spaces when it's done with safety and integrity. It's incredible benefits for many of us. Aho. Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you, Alana. And this slide is paying homage recognition to the culture of psychedelics in Australia, where here, thanks to EGA, who have been around since 2004, really pioneering a space for community and conversation and critical thinking around psychedelic medicines. Also for PRISM, established in 2011, who coordinate and support formal research into psychedelics. I'm a very proud member of the PRISM team. Big shout out to Martin Williams and Stephen Bright, Steve McDonald, who have pioneered that incredible hub of knowledge and skills. And also to Signs of Life, Alana's beautiful organisation, which I'm also proud to be a part of. And also, I forgot, Australian Psychedelic Society, I'm a co-founder of, and that was established in 2016. And again, a grassroots community hub that hosts film screenings, integration circles, and story events throughout Australia. So wherever you are in Australia, there is a community to connect to through the Australian Psychedelic Society.
Beautiful. Next slide, Melissa. I can explain a little bit about the Signs of Life. But before we do that, I just want to have a bit of a harm reduction disclaimer. You know, as we know, these medicines in Australia are still illegal, but the Signs of Life, you know, proudly advocates for decriminalisation, and we provide nuanced harm reduction services. But we're not specifically endorsing you to go out and, you know, partake in illegal activities, but really holding that freedom of consciousness and acknowledging the human rights issues that are occurring around the world because of the lack of, you know, laws to support safe substance use, and just be validating the multiple ways people do medicine, whether it's clinical, ceremonial, solo, or guided processes. But please be aware of your context and the potential risk and benefits to you. And yeah, just really holding these Indigenous medicines and ceremonial lineages, and really hoping that the Signs of Life can work with irony and reciprocity as we need to learn, you know, better ways of being sustainable and not feeding the you know, the capitalist machine, and just the tragedy that can come with taking these resources from these communities. And just acknowledging that these programs are done across the world as well, so legal contexts are very different depending on where you are, and just being safe within your context. So the Signs of Life has been around for 12 years, and it has grown and evolved as I have, and I'm just at a really beautiful space with the Signs of Life, just grounding deeper and deeper into courage in many realms, working with people in this space, and helping clients to really access their inner courage through trauma and mental health. Integrity, focusing on integrity as a professional, as well as community integrity and integrity with the medicines, and really passionate about integration, becoming whole, being able to understand our parts and navigate our psyche with the goal of integration. And always have been, always will be passionate about community. I was a social worker first before a psychologist, and feel very deeply grounded in connecting and supporting other organisations such as EGA and PRISM and Enlightened Mental Health and APS as well. Next slide. Just briefly, some of the services we offer are clinical assessment and therapy, student placements across biomedical, social work, psychology. I do ketamine-assisted psychotherapy with a team who are for eligible clients, which is incredible to be offering that service now. CBD and THC consultation with Dr. Jamie Ricord, and a whole range of other services ranging from nature-based programs with Kit Klein, and also webinars. And you know, I've got a real passion for supporting survivors of sexual abuse, domestic violence, veterans, and also fluent in sign language. So we provide a lot of services in sign and work with the deaf and deafblind community. Next slide. just briefly about me, I come from a place of lived experience. I've experienced sexual trauma and relational violence at the early years of my life, and that was really formative, which led me to work at rape crisis centres from the age of 24 and still work in those organisations. Really passionate about crisis response and supporting people in those, dark night of the souls, those turning points in life. I am the coordinator of the Psychedelic and Plant Medicine Network, and worked at the Royal Women's Hospital and Sexual Assault Services for about 15 years now. Really passionate about EMDR and IFS, particularly with dissociative identity disorder, ritual abuse and cult survivors, and of course psychedelic community. And I'm currently working on a range of clinical trials and protocol development, which is really a privileged place to be with some amazing people, and have taught with Melissa on psychedelics today and various other programs. We've been on quite a journey together the last couple of years. Over to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Alana. I also come from a background of lived experience of trauma, and also through healing through a combination of holistic approaches, including psychedelics and meditation and movement-based practices. And I'm very proud to be Secretary of Psychedelic Research in Science and Medicine, which is a great honour to be involved in pioneering research in the clinical space throughout Australia. I'm a meditation teacher at Signs of Life with Alana. I have a background in neuroscience and currently working towards becoming a psychologist through psychedelic research with the PRISM team. And also a director of the Psychedelics Society, which is an international group that we're supporting an ecosystem of virtual technologists to create VR experiences and other extended state experiences to support preparation and integration. Also performance artists, including dance and poetry, a teacher with Alana at Psychedelics Today, and co-founder of the Australian Psychedelic Society.
So tonight, particularly as we move into the Q&A section, we just ask that everyone looks after themselves, particularly not disclosing any names of anyone who may have served medicine or any illegal kind of spaces. We just want to keep the container really safe for everyone. And given we'll be talking about trauma, we welcome people to share their experiences in the Q&A, but just leaving out, specific triggering information. We want to make sure everyone feels okay by the end of this webinar and really look after each other. We know that shame dies when it's told in safe places, so we want to create a really solid container for everyone tonight. And feel free, if you need, to reach out to any of us. Me or Melissa are available. We provide therapy, and we can have a quick chat if you're triggered at all in tonight's webinar. There's also Lifeline and 1-800-RESPECT. Next slide. Yeah, so the first part of the webinar is I'm going to reflect on the field and the risks that some of the risks I've experienced in the field, as well as an overall view of concerns and some suggestions for protecting yourself in this space. The nature of trauma, the victim survivor integrator model, which Melissa and I have developed really specialised sexual abuse programs based on, but we'll be making it a broader theme tonight, focusing on relational trauma, so domestic violence, bullying, sexual abuse, and just the relational trauma that occurs in this world. And Melissa will take us through an incredible heroine's journey metaphor, which will help map out the journey, the archetypal journey home that many of us go on. Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight this, the enormous psychedelic boom that's occurring around the world, and some of the lessons from the field that I have observed and learnt, and these risks occurring across different contexts, such as the underground, which may have dangerous practices such as unsafe containers, lack of proper screening, sexual abuse, or even sexualized behaviour in the ceremonial or community setting, which people may not think is predatory, but given people's highly vulnerable spaces and trauma background, that actual container becomes very unsafe quite quickly. Cult-like behaviours and mentalities that are forming, particularly in certain organisations, and the risks of these unregulated spaces, and how do we balance people being able to have freedom of consciousness and the right for medicine work, but also the lack of accountability and some of the measures that we need to create a safe container. And we've seen in the clinical trials that there's potential for breaking of boundaries and sexual abuse. That was highlighted in one of the videos on Four Corners, unfortunately, because there was an error in the trial of lack of proper monitoring, and a victim was abused. And just the counter-transference and transference that can arise in these clinical contexts, which practitioners need to be aware of, that they hold a lot of power in that space, in that clinical room, and we need to shine a light on that. And of course, concerns for reciprocity and ongoing colonialism and capitalism being rife in the medicine market. And just highlighting that the psychedelic organisations, there's been a range of issues that were highlighted on Four Corners, particularly due to certain organisations potentially not being registered by AHPRA and not being a registered regulated body, that there's a range of occupational health and safety issues that can occur. And what we do know now for many of us that have lived through the last couple of years is that there can be threats of defamation if you speak out against some of these organisations, and that work cover can't protect you actually from civil litigation if the person making those threats has a lot of money. And as a community in the field of psychedelics, we're really needing to build structures and mechanisms so that early career professionals or anyone entering these organisations and spaces have access to peer supervision with mentors who can hold the ethical dilemmas that are out there. We need, strong critical reflection to be aware of our own blind spots and shadows and existential lures and cognitive dissonance and ethical dilemmas. And for me, I personally have had lived experience, as I said, of sexual trauma and domestic violence, and I'd never experienced occupational abuse, so I wasn't aware of it. I had my blinders on, and being educated, well-read, well-travelled, I've worked in cults, etc. I had, my existential blind spots because of my passion for the field and, wanting to do this work so much. So we really, really need to provide a space where people are aware, unfortunately, that the devil is a master of disguise and takes on many forms. There's shadows out there, there's risks. Psychedelics are amplifiers of the unconscious, and that is in the client, in the shaman, the guide, the clinical lab research team. Many of these people are using medicines, are going through their own processes, their own dark night of the soul. And, we all have shadows, edges and blind spots. And as a community, how do we hold that and support each other? We need mechanisms for support. We need to be able to alert communities of bad actors and unsafe practices and find a way to be able to speak out against actors that may have, access to strong financial means. We really need to band together as a community. There's structures such as EPIC, which Antonika and Sam are heading up, which are looking at really developing these community charters and ways of in the community being able to look after itself and protect it from these dangers. Next slide. Yeah. So the nature of trauma. Traumatized people chronically feel unsafe in their bodies. The past is alive in the form of gnawing interior discomfort. Their bodies are constantly bombarded by visceral warning signs. And in an attempt to control these processes, they often become expert at ignoring their gut feelings and in numbing awareness of what is played out inside. They learn to hide from themselves. It's an incredible book, pivotal text by Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps the Score. Next slide.
The nature of trauma in itself, there's multiple facets to it. There's the actual event that occurred, but there's the effect the event has on that person's body and how it lives on in their lives. And then there's the experience of the event, experience, and the effect. That effect, though, can change over time. How we interpret the event, how we interpret our experience can evolve and can shift. Though there's no turning to baseline people whose worlds are being upended by trauma. A traumatic event is not simply a hardship to overcome. The trauma becomes a dividing line in people's lives. But it can catalyze deep transformation. People do more than survive, they become wise. There's great lessons to be found in how we can interpret and allow the lessons to live on in our lives. And Richard Tedzuki is a pioneering researcher into the effects of trauma, but also the potential of post-traumatic growth, and has also defined the post-traumatic growth inventory along with the characteristics of the individual and the process of shifting the storyline towards one of growth versus repression.
So just acknowledging tonight, we'll be focusing on relational trauma, but there's many, many layers of trauma. There's cultural trauma, maybe experiencing the impacts of colonization or migrants, refugees, disconnect from natural disasters and accidents. You know, many people that I've worked with they've already had sexual trauma and family violence, and then they experience a severe car accident and have to deal with, you know, brain injury and physical conditions. So the multi-layered impacts of these different traumas. And also existential trauma. It may have been because of spiritual abuse, being born into a family that does not allow you to express your spirituality, and cult-like behavior. Also financial abuse and financial trauma that many people experience, even through COVID, through being fired at the pivotal point in time of your life. You know, there's a lot of financial stress and pressure around the globe at the moment. Just really want to acknowledge that, which can lead to complex mental health. Systemic abuse. Many victim survivors enter into systems hoping for support, whether it's VOCAT, police, other family court scenarios. And what we know is that many people leave more traumatized than before they entered those systems. And there's huge issues in many of our systems. And of course, complex trauma, just huge respect for the many people out there who have experienced multiple layers, many varieties of trauma, and are still here and still trying. Next slide. So just talk to the barriers to recovery. Why is it so hard? Why is it so difficult to recover from trauma, and which is leading to complex mental health issues and the need for novel treatments? And that's why we're here tonight to talk about psychedelics, because the current treatments are often taking too long for people to get better, a lot of side effects, and the overall toll on the economy and the quality of life of people, because we need rapid access to novel treatments. So trauma is relational. Many people feel deep shame and blame if the crime has happened to them, if it's been sexual trauma, abuse, bullying. Typically victims, believe that they're responsible, that it's their fault. It's an attack on self and the mind, the body, and the spirit. There's huge issues in our current culture where violence is often endorsed, or toxic masculinity that can occur. And of course, acknowledging this is, goes across all genders. But we know that, for example, after sporting events, that there's a 40% increase in domestic violence directly after sporting events connected to alcohol-fueled violence. I think there's a huge issue there in our culture when people go out to celebrate sport, that 40% increase in people being harmed afterwards. The biological issues with PTSD, the ruptures, the temporality, ruptures the body's capacity for safety, for inner healing capacity, disturbs homeostasis, and victims are often in a never-ending activation state of fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and huge amounts of physical conditions that are then triggered because of those responses. Victims often operate from a place of distrust and vulnerability because they have to, because the world can feel very unsafe, and trusting has hurt them, and they don't know who to trust, whether it's an organization, a system, a boss, a partner, or even themselves. As Melissa said, they can lose trust to self and their inner instincts. And our work is really about reclaiming that, being able to one day be your own therapist and listen to your own gut and be able to trust yourself to navigate a highly complex and traumatic world. And yeah, want to do that one, Melissa?
And there's a huge prevalence of childhood trauma in our culture. And in fact, adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, have been linked to many different outcomes in adulthood, including further experiences of trauma, but also health impacts, including immune susceptibility, metabolic disorders, chronic pain, as well as mental health issues and addiction. And it's quite interesting that whilst 57% of individuals will experience one adverse childhood experience in their childhood, of those 50% of those who do experience an ACE, 87% of them will experience two or more. So those who experience one childhood traumatic experience are likely to experience more. So there is this compounding factor when it comes to childhood trauma, which increases the risks and the outcomes that are quite challenging from a biological, cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and social perspective.
So we'll take you through this framework that we run our programs, our post-traumatic growth after sexual abuse, but also how we work with our clients. And it's a great model to hold in mind, and it's the victim survivor integrator model. So part of you is lost, that is true. But part of you, a beautiful, amazing part, is also waiting to be found. And I just really hold that hope when anyone walks into my room, that no matter how complex the trauma is, that there's a self energy, there's a beautiful part that it is there to be found and rediscovered, no matter how wounded or how deep the trauma is. So this model has 3 stages. The victim survivor integrator helps people to understand their healing journey and where they are. And the goal is to move from a place of victimization to survival, and then ultimately thriving, and being able to integrate parts of psyche, as also be able to navigate the medicine world and medicine landscapes, knowing where they are in their map, whether they're in victim, survivor, and integrator stage, and what medicine and support might be most appropriate for where they are in their trauma trajectory. While no person has a choice about being a victim, they do have a choice about growing through the stages. Just holding that empowerment. We all have huge, enormous capacity for growth and change. Next slide. So the victim stage, what does it look like? And I just want to acknowledge the word victim with full respect and reverence, that the reason people are victims is because they've experienced a crime, they've experienced trauma, and often they don't get the validation that they needed from their parents, from their boss, from their system. And many people can get locked in victimhood their entire life. This can often be connected to borderline processing. I don't like the word disorder, so borderline processes, complex PTSD, dissociative identity, where large chunks of the psyche in the body can remain frozen in time in victimhood. And from that, there's a co-creation, not the victim's fault, but there's a co-creation often of more suffering and more wounding and more risk. At this time, the victim may feel like the entire world is against them and there's no point. And a state of mind can emerge, and it's a way of interacting with the world, and it's typically out of shame and fear, mistrust. And in this phase, the victim is often either not believed or shamed and further hurt, by the system. People tend to move out of this stage quicker if they disclose to someone and are believed, and if the police respond well, and then there's a conviction of the offender. That typically doesn't happen. My husband's a sexual abuse detective, and something like 5% of cases actually make it to actual sentencing. So it's extremely rare to get justice in the justice system for certain crimes, and that compounds trauma, leaves people feeling like there's helplessness, self-hatred, and victimhood. And instead of that energy being put onto where it belongs, the crime, it gets absorbed into the person's psyche and into their cells. And that's when self-hatred and addiction and self-harming manifests quite rife in this stage. Next slide. So common experiences of the victim stage. We've got triggers and flashbacks, not being believed or supported, almost gaslighting yourself, doubting your memories and feelings, shame, guilt, disorientation, not knowing your rights, unsafe sexual relationships and ongoing assaults. Often you're highly open and vulnerable in these spaces, same as domestic violence or even bullying. Once you've been bullied, it leaves you more open to putting up with bullies and believing those internalized voices of oppression. Dependence on offenders. People get very connected to their families who might be traumatic, or their bosses, or their bullies. And also there can be fear that the abuser will retaliate, which keeps people suspended in this space of disempowerment. Next slide. What happens when we get stuck in this phase? Victim mentality happens when an individual has not been able to process their trauma in a healthy way, and when they haven't had a cultural container and a support system to believe them and nurture them and support them. We can't do this alone. We need a whole ecosystem around us. Victim mentality looks like avoiding responsibility. There tends to be a lot of blaming others because they didn't get their original crime validated properly. But that can turn into global rage and global anger and global mistrust, and avoiding actual personal responsibility and their huge capacity to actually move to the next stage. A lot of self-sabotaging behaviours, self-harm, relationships, re-traumatising behaviours, risky situations, and lack of confidence and as I mentioned, resentment and anger. Next slide. How can people move out of this stage, and how can we support our clients, people we love and care about? From the feminist perspective, realising that the personal is the political. Although the crime or the abuse happened to you, unfortunately, you're not alone. There's a deep collective archetypal field which you can tap into for strength, and knowing that this lived experience is actually a political issue that needs structural systemic change. There's professional support, really unpack the pros and cons of different systems. Maybe the police and judicial system isn't the best pathway for that person. Maybe it's going to cause more trauma. Maybe it is the right pathway for them. So having really neutral therapists and supports that can help hold that nuance and really help the person figure out what is going to be the least harmful process for them, what is going to be the most empowering step for them to take. And in this phase, the victim really needs to start trying to reclaim their body through, might be mindfulness practices, body-based practices, but starting to bit by bit reclaim their space, reclaim their body. Pivotal is that basic self-care and food and diet that all goes out the window when you're dysregulated and dissociative or angry or living in shame. So a huge focus on the temple and getting the body healed. If you know someone, please offer them help and support finding their own solutions, encourage them and validate them, believe their pain and their ability to heal, and set boundaries. and refrain from engaging in splitting behaviours or projections. And victims need to know that they actually are responsible for their health and that they have power and that they can do it, and really support that through empowering languages and services. Next slide. The survivor stage. The survivor is it's quite a powerful stage, is when people start to feel they've gotten through the trauma, whether it was domestic violence, bullying, occupational abuse, family violence, many forms of abuse. They feel like, yeah, I've gone through it. It's over, and but their major form of identity is still attached to this trauma, so it's still at the very forefront of their mind. They're no longer in the trauma; they're outside of it. They start to feel less pain, less guilt, and start to take more control of their life. And this is often potentially a better place to start moving into the medicine world, because there is a bit more of a container. There's a bit more internal safety. There's a bit more self-belief to move into those higher realms of healing and growth, and have a better opportunity to stabilize. Be a little bit more risky in the victim stage if those basic self-care and self-harming behaviours, for example, are still there. Next slide. And the survivor stage, or the thriver. So in order to move from victim to survivor, thriver, we really need to make meaning connection with our post-traumatic growth. We need to be able to put a narrative around our experience. As Dr. Trail Dowie once said to me, which is really powerful, is that the self is a narrative. We're actually a moving process, a moving story. And at any moment we can collapse our narrative and we can rebuild, we can start again. And psychedelics, particularly such as psilocybin and ayahuasca and even San Pedro, can give us the opportunity to dissolve, collapse our narrative, and start to rebuild. Who do I want to be now? What lessons do I want to embody? What types of people do I want to be around? How do I want to look after myself? So in this phase, we really see people start to re-engage with relationships, connect with professional supports, and really start to excel more in their metacognitive skills, which we'll go more into later. But metacognitive skills is the capacity to catch your thoughts and observe them without fusing or blending with them, being aware of your feelings, being able to hold multiple feelings at once. Shame, but compassion for yourself and compassion for that shame, anger, but also trust that you will get through it and you'll find a way to release it safely. And there's a deeper, reclaiming and remembering of intuitions and the gut, and remembering, being able to be guided by your body somatically, and just the capacity to, observe, track and monitor, which is really essential for particularly high dose psychedelics. People get more out of their medicine if they have sharper metacognitive skills. Next slide. Yeah, and this is kind of the thriver stage. So it's really crystallizing the growth of the survivor stage, except you're shifting from I've survived the trauma, I've been, you've gone backwards? Yeah. Instead of the identity is I'm a survivor of abuse, it's one part of your story. You've got an evolving narrative, many, multiple dimensions of your being, and it's not the front and center stage of your mind and your being. You have more, relationships and more commitment to health and well-being, feelings of empowerment, creativity and connection, and are aware of relapses. And you actually have the skills, the metacognitive skills, to know your parts, know your triggers, and know how to get help. And there tends to be a real falling in love with the journey home, the archetypal journey home to self, and knowing that you're part of a bigger mystery and a larger landscape of the great mystery of the dark night of the soul. And this phase is a beautiful phase in the medicine when you can integrate your journeys and experiences with a huge respect for yourself. Next slide. Yeah, so the integrator stage, just finishing up this section, trauma is set firmly in the past. The integrator can use this experience to uh, to define their own identity, but they also have, a grasp on the future and hope and moving into other identity spaces, telling our stories, sharing our worth, and showing our vulnerability and growth. It all matters because we matter. Next slide.
I think a key aspect of this model as well is that it's not solidified. It's not a clear journey from victim to survivor to integrator. It's a bit of a cycle where you'll pick up pieces of yourself that may still be existing in the victim mode or who get triggered and return to that. And part of the integrator, part of integration itself is become whole. That's what integrate, the Latin, means. So it's finding those places within ourselves that do need that care. And as the integrator within you grows, they can nurture the inner parts, the victim and the survivor, that may need to either soften or be courageous. And part of this model, now this is inspired clearly by Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, and taking it from the philosophical school of using the feminine as the third person in the narrative. We're describing here the heroine's journey. And I think it's an interesting way of framing the dynamic tension that's often present in psychotherapy. Because, a goal without steps is merely a wish. And the future is a possibility for things to be different, the possibility for renewal, for post-traumatic growth. And it is a journey. There are different stages: the exploratory stage, learning to tolerate and allow what has happened, and welcoming in the new. So Joseph Campbell described that this journey is a bit like opening a trapdoor to hell. And if you're not resourced enough to go there, getting resourced is really important. And initially, there's a temptation to resist the call, to really deny the stages of grief, deny what has happened, to repress. And there's a whole reason why that's the case. It's really painful, and this is a journey of being able to tolerate and accept and move through and find renewal in pain. So there's this initial phase of receiving the call, of then crossing the threshold into the unconscious mind, into the body, into allowing yourself to accept and move through and address what has happened, which, as we will discuss further, the nervous system changes after trauma, and that can result in trials and failures, triggers, challenges. And it really is, there's an opportunity here to receive guidance from therapists, from knowledge sources, from community, from your inner resource, and to seek growth and new skills. Joseph Campbell said that the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And in most transformative processes, in fact, written into the LCD mysteries, that ancient Greek rite in which the citizens of Athens took Psyche on a psychedelic, there was the three stages: the journey into the unconscious realms, the fasting and the dancing and the chanting, the consumption of a psychedelic, the ordeal, the death and rebirth experience, and then the potential growth that can occur afterwards. Joseph Campbell says we must be willing to let go of the life we plan, so we can live the life that is waiting for us. And the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you are, and you are the hero of your own story. And there's this opportunity in meeting this challenge and allowing yourself to face and to support yourself through community, to experience revelation, transformation, and to return to the conscious world, to the waking world changed. And this journey doesn't always feel easy. It can be a bit more like snakes and ladders. Sometimes you find yourself on the wrong ladder, climbing the wrong wall, and sometimes triggers occur. So I sort of charted this as a bit of a journey here from the victim stage to the survivor stage to the integrator stage. where broken boundaries and trust, loss of identity can actually result in a deep returning to the self. There's this opportunity when uh, when you face, I guess, a form of deep inner challenge, potentially destruction, to rebuild, consciously rebuild. And the different post-traumatic growth areas is defined by different researchers such as Suzuki and also Kelly McGonigal, among others, as starting off with a return to an appreciation for life. So increases in gratitude, altruism, a sense of priorities, appreciation for the good in life. And this is definitely done through acceptance of the reality of the trauma, the reality of the consequences of the trauma, unchosen consequences. Resourcing with people who understand that reality and who can support you in that recovery, developing your own personal strength. So we find increased resilience, self-reliance, confidence, humility, and deepened meaningful narrative. And in doing this, we can start to begin to recognize positive, even in the midst of challenges and difficulties, and open to new possibilities, increase openness, capacity for connection, greater authenticity, and potentially improved relationships. There's this disconnection that can frequently occur in trauma, the fight and flight, which we'll go into in great detail soon, the fight, flight, fawn, freeze, faint systems within the unconscious aspects of the nervous system, and yet also the opportunity to tend and befriend, shifting from fight to flight to tend and befriend as being one of the keys out of the trauma state into growth states. And spiritual growth, which can definitely be supported through psychedelics, the careful use of psychedelics in the healing phase, and a deepened sense of meaning and understanding of your own beliefs, the philosophies of life, and clearer purpose. And we know that hope is one of the most powerful predictors of resilience and post-traumatic growth, as well as self-compassion. Next, we'll just explore some of those unconscious systems that we touched on. So the somatic sense, polyvagal theory, and interoception, and also the idea of multiplicity that we both touched on, this idea of parts that can emerge as coping mechanisms and protective mechanisms after a trauma, and how that's definitely a relational process that you can engage with and deepen your sense of connection to yourself and others. So the nervous system is broken into two chains. This might be something a lot of people already know, but the autonomic nervous system has a parasympathetic branch and a sympathetic branch. The sympathetic branch is related to mobilization, activation. It's our fight and flight response, but also a source of energy, a source of, that day before a due date kicks in and suddenly you can concentrate, that kind of thing. Also a sense of adventure as well in a healthy nervous system, but also can activate and create fight and flight responses as well. And the parasympathetic nervous system is sort of the rest and digest aspect and is definitely, there's innervation throughout the body through the vagus nerve, which is a nerve bundle that runs down the whole length of the body. And there's actually two branches of the vagus nerve. There's the ventral vagus, which is, as we discussed, this connection and relaxation aspect of the nervous system, an information highway of the brain to body. But there's also the dorsal vagus, which is actually more like a faint or a extreme freeze or a play dead response. So actually a mobilization defeat, and is definitely related to trauma and can be activated after a traumatic event through triggers, and can actually be, and nervous systems can become stuck in that state. So the vagus system is hierarchical, meaning that newer circuits are inhibitory over older circuits, but these older circuits predate to sort of the days of reptilian function. So they're not always as rational as we would like them to be, or controllable as we would hope them to be. But we understand the neurophysiological responses that are wired into our system. Trauma victims no longer have to blame themselves for how their body responded at the time or is responding now. And there are different tools that one can access to shift these nervous system states. Because trauma is usually associated with failures to get away. We've had to resort to extreme coping mechanisms to meet a threat in our environment. This is charting those different aspects of the nervous system: green, the parasympathetic; yellow, the sympathetic; the gas pedal; and the brake system of the dorsal vagal system, which is a disorientation, I can't, a freeze, fold, play dead, where the threat has become overwhelming. And these different nervous system states live out in behavioral strategies: freeze, flight, fawn, fight, also not on here, faint, the play dead. And these behavior strategies carry on through our lives in unconscious ways. So freeze can look like difficulty making decisions, getting stuck, dissociation, isolating yourself, numbing, whether that be through just neuropharmacology innately, or through addictions, or through eating, whatever it is, being avoidant. The flight system can look like relentless thinking, OCD, anxiety, panic, hyperactivity, perfectionism, and being overly involved in work or even in other people's problems and avoiding the self. The fight system can look like anger outbursts that are uncontrollable, attempting to control situations or others, explosive behaviors, actually being the bully, being the perpetrator of further trauma as a strategy for feeling okay and in control, and potentially even narcissistic behaviors, because there is this focus on self because self is unsafe. And then the fawn system, which is people pleasing, a lack of identity, no boundaries, someone who overcommits because they can't actually feel their own needs, feeling overwhelmed, and codependency. And the reason is for these things that trauma impacts the body so strongly that the responses of the body are not often metabolized in that moment. And a trauma researcher, Omno van der Hert, calls this trauma time. We become stuck in trauma time. And in fact, completing the responses at a bodily level can be really effective for post-traumatic growth. And that can be done in therapy, and potentially is one of the healing aspects of the somatic aspects you see in things like MDMA-assisted therapy or THC-assisted therapy or ketamine-assisted therapy, where someone actually engages in physical responses to shift the nervous system. So we'll just explore current treatments that are available and also the potential and the risks and the considerations when it comes to using psychedelics in a post-traumatic growth journey. Back to you, Alana.
Okay, and many of you may be well versed in this, but we know that the current pharmacology particularly for PTSD, works in about 20 to 30% of cases, which is slightly only more effective than a placebo. That's not to diminish the medications can work for some people, but given that most trauma is relational and also has a spiritual and existential component, medications rarely reach those realms, and this is why the need for novel treatments like psychedelics, EMDR and EFT, internal family systems, ACT therapy. There's a huge range of modalities, and what I'm really excited is as these novel treatments unfold, we'll be taking these modalities, particularly sensomotor work and anything that's somatic, and combining it with the different models of psychedelic medicine to really get the best out of both worlds, where we have the therapist that can hold a safe container with multiplicity of tools and resources, as well as the psychedelic. But just honouring that many people have difficulties trusting and building rapport with a therapist, and you can get so much burnout trying to find the right person to work with. It can be slow and expensive. It can be re-traumatizing and destabilizing. It can make you feel like you're doing something wrong when actually it's not the right fit, or you might, for some people, need a medicine, treatment resistant. And many therapists, unfortunately, do not have the existential depths that a client requires to overcome trauma. And again, not to diminish therapists, but many training programs don't even mention existential realms, and are able to support people to move in the archetypal landscapes and indigenous ways of knowing and feeling. So there's big limitations in our current treatments. Next slide.
This is just a brief overview of medicine-assisted therapies or psychedelic-assisted therapies, sort of where things are at the moment. I think the most commonly known medicine that's been used and has the greatest amount of clinical evidence behind it is MDMA, which, as a lot of you may know, increases and releases serotonin, dopamine, and hormones such as oxytocin and prolactin and vasopressin, which are key bonding hormones, and also decreases activity in the amygdala, the center of the fight and flight response in the brain. So they decrease fear and defensiveness, whilst increasing empathy, trust, and sense of physical safety, emotional safety, which can be really key for developing the therapeutic relationship. And we'll explore this in more depth in a few slides. I wanted to touch on psychedelics as well. Now, there aren't any outcomes from clinical trials looking at psychedelics. I think there's good reason for that. Early in the research, there was a big need to establish MDMA and psychedelics as potential medicines. And this was done in conditions that were easier potentially to treat or more straightforward to treat than trauma, such as depression. Because of this nervous system involvement in trauma, there is the chance of reactivation of trauma, of retriggering, of actually causing a fight or flight or freeze or dissociative response. So there's a lot more consideration when it comes to actually using a psychedelic in someone who has a traumatized nervous system. That being said, I just did a check today, and there are 5 trials currently recruiting participants to study PTSD with psilocybin in the world, and one trial that's currently in progress. So it is shifting, and I think the potential for psychedelics to help here is, whereas MDMA can create safety in the body, psychedelics can help on the existential level and also create behavioral changes that may be needed to keep that person out of traumatic loops, or to understand the context of their story and to shift themselves into a growth phase. And ketamine as well. While there's not necessarily any clinical data out yet, there's a lot of case studies, and it is being used. And a lot of the key therapists that we discussed in the previous slide or on the previous slide, such as Basil van der Kolk, Richard Swartz, they're actually using ketamine as part of their trauma treatment programs. And what we seem to see is that ketamine does dislodge a lot of the defenses that are developed in reaction to trauma. So protective parts step back, and there's this inhibition between the sensations in the body and consciousness, which means that we can work with or expand that zone of tolerability of exploring the trauma and the pain underneath the trauma. And ketamine has been shown to increase neuroplasticity. I think what's really important here to highlight, increased neuroplasticity in infrequent dosing. There's actually been a large increase in ketamine addiction over the last few years, particularly during COVID. I think that's partially off the back also of a lot of the positive results that have come out clinically. But those increases in neuroplasticity actually dramatically decrease and lead to actually neurotoxicity the more frequent the dosing occurs. And that's sort of at the point of frequent dosing, more than 2 to 3 times a week for multiple weeks. That starts to actually decrease neuroplasticity and actually cause some atrophy in white matter and regions of the brain. So just be aware of that. And I'll also touch on THC and CBD later as a tool to increase somatic safety in the body and access to the unconscious, and also some caveats there as well. The first,
with that, can I just, I just wanted to mention about, just because I've worked with a small sample of people who've had sexual trauma and had legal ketamine IV therapy with me, and it's been incredible. It's only a small sample, but it's been incredible when people who have had sexual trauma, who've got dissociative processes, are actually able to dissociate, safely in a room that's held and there's trust and they know they're not going to get hurt, and they're actually able to, leave their body and go into those dissociative ketamine realms with intention, and then with follow-up hearts work, internal family systems work, and an ongoing integration work. So it's just a really beautiful piece of work that I've been able to be a part of, and yeah, huge potential for something that was used just as a biomedical medicine to actually be able to create a trauma safe container around that biomedical process that we're now seeing.
Definitely a powerful tool when used carefully. And I just wanted to touch on how trauma affects our models of the world, our unconscious predictive processing shifts after trauma. And I guess one of the things I think of, I'll go a bit more into what predictive processing is and how we develop our models of the world in a second. But there's this widening of what I call uncertainty bands. Our brain is constantly trying to minimize uncertainty, make predictions about the world. What happens when a traumatic event occurs is these uncertainty bands widen, and that's energetically expensive. So you see this increase in actually tiredness and actually energetic expense when it comes to navigating relationships in the world. It's a lot more challenging because we're a lot more uncertain about the consequences and the potential things that could occur in our lives. We can't just trust moving through the world. So there's increased concerns for safety, increased vigilance, and also there's the challenges of what is called the just world fallacy, in that, well, our brain is seeking reasons as to why this happened. And there's this unconscious belief, if you live a good life, if you live by your values, good things will happen to you. But that's not always the case. Bad things happen to good people. And we don't necessarily live in a just world. And this unconscious assumption that we do is actually, I think, at the heart of some of the victim blaming attitudes that are prevalent in culture as well. Or, they must have done something to deserve that. Maybe they were engaging in risky behaviors of some kind. And it allows our cognitive framing to easily explain away actions of injustice and crime in the world, which is just something to be aware of, because it is a bias existing in our cognition. There's also this disruption to the sense of temporality, where behavior in the now, behavior in the now becomes a response to the past. And guilt, looking for reasons why this happened to you. And it can be a relief to be able to say that sometimes we can't make sense of things, that the world doesn't have to be predictable. There isn't a reason why something happened. And in fact, that's where someone can begin to find agency. And the ability to work towards growth from the trauma is about looking at what's coming up that has challenged one's sense that life should be fair. And just a little bit on how we develop our mental models. Yep. So constantly, like evolutionary process, thoughts arise and behaviors emerge, and our brain tracks how successful they are in the world and the responses we get from them. And slowly over time, this vast sea of memories, sense data, genetic predilections, dreams, a lifetime of learnt meaning, this tapestry of our experience, continuously, automatically, unconsciously, we develop models about the world and are testing it all, and ideally keeping the stuff that works. And this is an energy conserving process for the brain. And every thought, every action wires and neural pathways of the brain, and we're developing its ever evolving roadmap from which we interpret all our experiences. And there's 100 trillion neural connections mapping each of our brains. It's a unique tapestry of learned experience. And that's how we are able to move through the world at ease. But trauma ruptures this process and shifts this mental model, as we discussed previously, in those different ways. And there's this idea of predictive processing, where predictions are called priors or prior beliefs. And those who experience trauma or those with mental illness may have heavily weighted negative priors, therefore increasing the potential to have negative interpretations of one's life. these synaptic connections stabilize into new neural pathways and create stable habits of response. And it's important to become aware of our mental models and become aware of different ways of changing them. And I think there's different little categories of sort of developed here, such as the dynamic flexibility, whether it be creativity, active imagination, engaging in nature-based practices, psychedelics, developing one's metacognition and contemplation skills to actually be able to critically reflect and become aware of what we're learning and why we're learning and what we would like to learn. So that includes things like meditation, getting to know your system within, actually having some psychoeducation on things like trauma, nervous system states, and ways to create shifts, and also curating your information diet. Also becoming aware internally of your somatic environment and also your external environment, how your home, how the people in your life are creating and influencing the models of your world, and how we can actually create shifts there. And that could even be something simple as having a fast or a cold shower or changing or updating your environment, being really selectively choosing who we spend time with, and also connection and meaning, and developing your own self-determined values and engaging in right action in a way that is gentle and compassionate. And unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, so the brain's always seeking to minimize energetic expense and surprise by creating these models of the brain. And under stress, we actually become more fixed, released, tightened as a defensive response to uncertainty, stress, and trauma. And the current working models of how psychedelics one of the reasons why they may help shift and create more flexible ways of thinking is this idea that they relax prior beliefs and can shift our mental models based on the experiences that we have on psychedelics. And that is some characteristics that seem to be consistent and innate among psychedelics, but there's not all ability enabling potentially in the right type of setting to break out of repetitive and rigid ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And this is also associated with the ability to reduce or relax the weight of prior beliefs, and potentially even the kind of eustress or healthy stress that is achieved through the activation of what I'll explain in a moment, pivotal mental states that psychedelics do seem to bring out in us, these emotional breakthroughs. So this idea of pivotal states, I think, is quite interesting because it really relates, in fact, to trauma neurobiology. This moment in which there's a turning point, there's in a fork in the road type experience, which stress is one of the aspects that does activate this in the brain. And psychedelics are a kind of potential stress, and potentially in the right setting, a healthy stress. So this is a system that's inbuilt in our evolutionary function to aid transformation when actual perceived environmental pressures demand this. So it's a process in which one can potentially shift dramatically when the environment calls for it, and can mediate psychological transformation. Now, this idea that the psychedelic state in itself is a kind of increasing the mechanisms in which trauma creates a dramatic learning experience is quite interesting, and is explored in this quote here, which is, according to German philosopher and theologian Robert Alto, this type of encounter, the mystical experience, feels life-threatening from the perspective of the identity or ego. A point he explores the de facto existence of earth-shattering fear when one finds oneself in the presence of the numinous. This threat to life is akin to the threat to life felt during a traumatic experience. Mystical experience can also be life-altering. Some of the previously mentioned blah, 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 a mystical encounter with the numinous, which contains no small amount of dread, can have the effect of catalyzing lifestyle changes, inspiring one to participate more fully in co-creating their life, and revolutionizing a sense of meaningfulness in one's psyche. This kind of alteration to life is akin to the alteration experienced after the traumatic experience. Only this sort of shift is subjectively far better. Also explored in the concept of kairos, a turning point in the life journey where major change simply must occur because a person is unable or unwilling to continue in his or her present course. It is a point of desperation, a breaking point, something has to give, and it does. And I won't go into too much detail here. Sorry for too much text. But basically, what I wanted to say is the 5-HT2A receptor, which is the receptor most strongly activated by psychedelics, seems to be the gateway receptor to psychedelic experience. Each psychedelic has individual flavors of receptors that can define the slight differences in their phenomenology. 5-HT2A receptor seems core to psychedelic experience. It has been shown to be part of what can be described as a healing crisis in biology, where there's an increase in sensitivity to the environment and also the ability to transform, increase cognitive flexibility and neuroplasticity effects. Yeah. So I guess just a little summary here that psychedelics don't guarantee positive change or transcendent experiences. They're very much contextual experience enhancers, that they offer this window of opportunity for change and creativity to be held safely and adaptively. And it really is up to the intentional aspects of the experience, the container of the experience, and how someone is held. And in case of trauma, someone being held gently, compassionately, and allowing different nervous system states to occur, but in a state where they are completely safe and can integrate that. And did you want to add anything there, Alana?
No, I think we'll keep moving. We've got about 15, 20 minutes till Q&A, so we can move.
Let's move quickly.
Yes.
So just briefly on MDMA and how that works in the brain. I mentioned how there's this increase in serotonin, noradrenaline, dopamine, as well as neurohormones such as oxytocin, prolactin, vasopressin bonding hormones. What's really key here is how this shift in neuropharmacology and neural networking through the downregulation of the amygdala affects the re-encoding of trauma memories. Got a little cute animation here. So under the influence of MDMA, patients can more readily experience and process emergent psychological material in a state of psychological ease and safety, because when we bring out a traumatic memory of our filing system, we don't just take that memory out, read it, put it back, and it stays how it was. Every time we take or are triggered or remember a memory, that particular recording is shredded and it's rewritten with the emotional tone that we experienced at the time. In the case of trauma, that means that traumatic memories are rewritten again and again with further retriggering and further distress. Whereas in the state of MDMA, with a sense of safety, a sense of empathy and compassion to the self, and an ability to access all parts of the self, this is frequently that has the ability to be then re-encoded in a state of love, safety, and acceptance, which allows a less triggering experience when that memory is recalled in the future after the MDMA has worn off.
So I'll just briefly mention CBD and THC, particularly from the medical cannabis perspective. Just that with people that might be wanting to go into higher doses of psychedelics like ayahuasca or psilocybin, but their nervous system may not be ready, there's a potential for dissociation and blocking and struggle. And CBD can really help people to reach more homeostasis in their system and drop deeper into therapy and into wellness, and also parts work and being able to tolerate, I guess, distress, expand their window of tolerance, which can help prepare for psychedelics. And Saj Ravi's work, particularly in sensomotory psychotherapy, works with cannabis and in high doses as well for PTSD, but also leading people into other medicines such as psilocybin. Obviously, there needs to be a caution with cannabis because it can be, for some, it can be addictive. And if people aren't ready to drop into various parts, that's when things like paranoia and fear and all of this unconscious stuff from the psyche can emerge. But what we do say is, if that was held in a safe container, you might be able to explore that and release it somatically in your cells. So it's about context and dose, and I guess is it helping support your life, or is it actually resulting in you further withdrawing and going into addictive patterns. And it can also be incredible for chronic pain for many people who've got trauma, and also trauma that they can't identify. There's no physical diagnosis, but their body hurts, their spirit hurts, and the homeostasis that these oils can bring can be really supportive for that. Next slide.
So just briefly, as we wanted to outline the potential pathway, which could be utilized in the treatment of trauma with careful consideration when to use certain medications, certain medicines that we've discussed in the preparation stage, really hoping to hone someone's somatic knowledge, their psychoeducation, as well as their mindfulness training and metacognitive skills, and to potentially use CBD and THC to help them regulate and create safety in the nervous system, and ketamine to potentially loosen defenses and build a therapeutic bond. When that person has sufficient tools, when consent and contracts have been established with all their system, all their parts, engaging in more deep work through MDMA-assisted therapy, in which there can be shifts in trauma memory and avoidance, as well as increased acceptance. And then potentially doing existential work and also potentially immunomodulatory work and anti-inflammatory benefits, such as through psychedelic-assisted therapy, increased connection as well. And then going through a phase in which this is integrated into the new normal. What's left, we often find that in the case of trauma, there's layers to the onion. So the cycle may have to be repeated a few times. It isn't going to be an easy road. I think it's not going to be like the trials you see where it's 2 sessions and there's remission. It's going to be a journey. And yeah, that journey, I'm sure many of you already know the structure of the psychedelic assisted therapy journey, but Alana will take you through that briefly.
Yeah, so we've got preparation, the acute experience, and integration. And I guess just from a trauma perspective, preparation, it's about looking at your map, your nervous system map, knowing, are you dissociative? Are you avoidant, disorganized? What trauma context are you bringing to the medicine? And is the container the right one for you? Should it be with a guide, a ceremonial context, in a clinic? Really thinking really critically about what your body, your mind, and your spirit needs, and working out the nuances around that. Preparation can last a long time. People can spend a year just preparing for psychedelics, and that might be through CBD, THC, meditation, breath work, learning to let go of their body and feel okay in that space before going into those higher peak experiences. So don't rush the preparation phase. It's a whole body of work. And it's incredible when you can really stabilize some tools, some metacognitive tools in the preparation phase, so that you can observe your thoughts and feelings and parts. Because when they're, amplified in the medicine, and particularly ayahuasca and psilocybin, if you've got some capacity to watch and observe, it can be less traumatic, because those medicines can be quite big. And if you've got some skills in there, some metacognitive flexibility and awareness, it can really help with the integration and the landing. Of course, the acute phase is when we're more receptive and flexible. We're in an open state. This is a sacred space where there should be no interfering with your safety, your body, projections, even good intended people supporting you that might be putting their energy, their data, their story into your process. You want that container to be for you and uninterrupted by all those elements that could potentially hurt you. And the acute experience is making sure you've got the container that's right for you, whether it's nature, clinic, overseas, ceremonial. What body of land is going to hold you to expand into those realms? And integration, and finding someone that can go on that journey with you. And of course, we recommend a therapist, but it might be an elder, it might be a mentor, it might be an integration group, a ceremonial space, musical space. There's many different modalities. We really recommend that you don't just do it alone, because our culture doesn't have the container yet. for people just to do it alone. You know, in the jungle, for example, where medicine is integrated into the very fabric of their being and their community, they don't need to go and see a therapist necessarily, because their whole tribe, their whole community is speaking in symbiosis with the plants. They're in synergy. Whereas us, we do medicine and then get dropped back into fragmentation, capitalism, greed, etc. It's a lot, and I really, really do recommend you find a solid mentor container to sustain that growth so that you don't contract back into old stories and old traumas, which can happen really quickly if you don't get the right support. Next slide. Again, just setting, and we add skill. A lot of people talk about set and setting, but if you have, you know, the set and setting and don't have a lot of skills, the medicine, you know, it won't land. So really want to emphasize the skills. But from a trauma context, the set is what you bring to the medicine. So it might be your personality structure, your attachment styles, personality processes, or even being okay to talk to someone about, you know, I have a bit of narcissism, I have a bit of borderline process. Could this come up in the medicine? And yes, it will. So what is your mind? What are the traits that you bring? What are your trauma memories? What are your fears, phobias, worries? Really being curious about that. And also your values and your hopes and your dreams. You know, what are you bringing to the medicine? Again, we've spoken about all the different containers, the settings that you can expand in. And if you're neurodiverse, being a little bit more mindful maybe about some of these containers might need to be adjusted for your sensory needs, and being really careful with that, because if you don't plan for it, it can, you know, people can be harmed through the wrong sensory settings. And skills. Having metacognitive skills, having the capacity for interoception, somatic awareness, the ability to regulate, the ability to name it when you are dysregulated, and to, without shame, to be able to let people, you know, that I'm activated, I'm dissociative, I'm being dissociative, being able to really have grit and resilience to hold your system without shame, and you know, develop your toolkit. What is your tools? Nature-based practices, messa, altar work, meditation. What is your toolkit to then sustain the medicine? Next slide. And just briefly, the biopsychosocial model, we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. With psychedelics in particular, we really do not recommend doing medicine if you are, you know, physically unsafe or being threatened, if you're being harmed, if it's still active. It can be quite risky to then expand into, you know, cosmic consciousness and into archetypal realms if your basic human safety is compromised. You know, it's really important that you know, if you can, you know, have these elements in, you know, in your awareness: sleep, nutrition, what values you're moving towards, meaning, exercise, and just solid container to return home to. There's nothing worse than people doing medicines and then coming back to an unsafe partner or a judgmental work environment, or whatever it might be. Just be really cautious of that pyramid and what is your map that you've got around you. Next slide. And just these post-traumatic growth factors to grow, to heal from trauma, to move through it. We do need to accept. We need to accept the mystery, accept the shadow, the darkness, often requiring us to trust beyond what we can see and understand as human beings in this great mystery that we're all a part of. Compassion for parts and self, gratitude, openness to feelings. You know, when you numb the bad, you also numb the good. So, you know, openness to all feelings: rage, disgust, terror, love, freedom, etc. Interoception, narrative awareness, be able to be the author of your own story. And it's really powerful for narrative therapy. You start to realize that you're an actor, you're a player, you know, in Leela, in this divine comedy or divine play that we're all a part of. And what story do you want to tell? What life do you want to live? And yeah, the metacognitive skills to navigate this intelligence, this wisdom. Next slide. And just being really mindful of all the different containers that are out there for medicine. There's relational medicine work, MDMA, for example, with tumour, philosophical spaces, creative space, therapeutic, celebratory, working with seasonal medicine through equinox and solstice, also festival space, somatic places such as high dose cannabis, for example, therapy. And it's really important to consider your context and where your body is going to feel safest. And the laws and the structures around you as well are really important to consider. And people can rush into the wrong context and get harmed. And I'm not putting any bias on what context is better than the other. It's really personal, but I just think people need to give it more thought, because it might not be safe if you've had sexual trauma or physical abuse for the first time you expand to be necessarily in a creative or celebratory space. You might need that time just for you in a somatic container, in a therapeutic container. Next slide.
And just a reminder from two very experienced psychedelic explorers, there is no casual experiment when you're dealing with the human psyche, especially when you're dealing with a part that is not conscious most of the time. You're dealing with life and death, whether you expect to be or not. So just a reminder that, as we've already explored, container and preparation are really vital, and that something quite beautiful can shift to something quite re-traumatizing quite easily, particularly when in a nervous system that has already been exposed or frequently been exposed to trauma or dysregulated states. And Alana will just touch on some tips and mitigations for re-traumatization.
Yeah, so I guess we need to be careful that psychedelics are not a panacea. Guides, clinicians, trials, are flawed. We need to go in with, not mistrust, but healthy awareness of the capacity that things won't go to plan, and that awareness that re-traumatization can occur. The medicine can test us, particularly ayahuasca. There can be shock. There can be new content that's occurred that you didn't know was there, new memories, and people talk about bad trips, but we know that if approached with metacognitive skills and the capacity to hold compassion and play with the phenomena and be curious about the phenomena, you're less likely to get stuck in a dark place. So really, I encourage non-attachment as a resource. So being able to observe the phenomena in the psychedelic journey, observe, the devil in the corner, observe the memory, the pain, the somatic experience. See if you can just hold the space of observation, and in that space there's that huge capacity for resilience, for grit, and for transformation. Keep returning to presence, a mantra, breath work, your intention for being here, to let go, to trust, to surrender. And remember that psychedelic experiences can feel real, but they are also transitory. They can be myth, they can be literal, it can be cosmic junk, it can be a cosmic joke, archetypal energy. Go in knowing that you're opening yourself up to phenomenological play and mystery, and you don't have to attach your thoughts to every piece of the journey. Be really open and expansive. And yeah, of course, narrative therapy and mindfulness really help people to play with the phenomena. Try not to get stuck and fix notions of truth and belief, because that will then feed back into trauma and fear, rumination. You want to be able to open yourself up to the mystery. Next slide. Yeah, so dissociation, just be mindful that people can also dissociate from positive experiences. If you've lived a life of shame and self-loathing, and if you enter into cosmic consciousness and awe, people can contract because actually they don't feel worthy, or they don't trust it, or it's too much. So just keeping that in mind, and that can be worked on as you learn to love yourself and trust the medicine. Just being mindful of your dissociation, and is the therapist and container are really aware of it, and is the medicine exacerbating it, or is actually helping you go back into your body and into your 3D life. So really you need a toolkit of grounding skills. Music can really support dissociation in the ceremony, different tracks, different instruments to help people shift their mind and go back into their body. And we mentioned THC and CBD, and also I guess MDMA is probably one of the softer medicines potentially if you have a dissociative process, because it's probably going to ground you more into your heart and your stomach and into your relational field. Whereas if you're highly dissociative and disorganized and you take ayahuasca, there can be difficulties there, because we often say that you need an ego in order to dissolve your ego. So if your sense of self is really fragmented, potentially fragmenting it more can be further destabilizing. So you want to have an understanding of your parts, and you want to have access to self energy, so that if you do get thrown into the abyss, when you return, you've got a sense of self to come home to, not just a system of alters, ideally. So MDMA is probably a safer option. But yeah, the research is still unfolding, obviously. Next slide. Just very briefly, be aware of projection, transference, and countertransference. Also, not only in the medicine container, but with your colleagues, with leaders in this space, with researchers, with psychedelic organizations like this. Everyone is in process, and we need to be able to talk about this stuff. And if your therapist can't hold this, then that's a red flag, because it will happen in a medicine. You could see a lover in the shaman, you could see, your sister in the clinician, and with that comes a lot of emotion and content, and you need to be able to talk about that and work through it, and be proud, because they're there to be a mirror into your unconscious and a conduit for the medicine, and that's exactly what should be happening. But where people can get harmed is if they're not aware of it and they fall in love with their shaman, and then the shaman's actually, abusive, etc. When really it may have just been the first time they ever felt safe, and they don't actually love that guide, but their body feels safe, and then that's what they've jumped to, is, those big feelings. So beware of spiritual bypassing in yourself and in others, wanting to be a healer, getting involved in people's experiences. This is very personal work. We're all learning. Even the most experienced guides on the planet are still human beings with parts and shadows, and just try not to amplify people beyond human form, because we've all got our limitations, and being aware of that will keep you safer. Next slide. We're probably about 5 minutes left, Melissa, reckon?
Yeah, I'm thinking what we can skip past, but I'll just quickly say, I guess this slide is mainly about the idea that one of the key things that prevents a mystical experience, a transformative experience, is the experience of anxiety during the session. You can see here that non-responders are in the red line and responders are on the purple line. So those who experience high anxiety didn't actually get remission from depression for any period of time, and had some challenging experiences. So how do we keep people in what has been described as the flow state, which is poised between anxiety and boredom or apathy? How do we create a space in which someone meets the experience with the sufficient skills, ease, and confidence to find flow? And I think a key aspect you have touched on is this idea of metacognition. So how do we understand and navigate our experiences? It's been described as thinking about thinking, and it's your ability to have knowledge over your own cognitive processes. And it's really key for your ability to self-regulate and to learn and to self-reflect. So just some aspects of metacognition is compassion, recognition of impermanence, gratitude and appreciation, your ability to track emotional states. We touched on a few of these already. And some skills to engage with this are things like meditation, developing interoceptions, body scanning, and developing a comfort within your own body, either through meditation or movement practice, such as yoga. yoga has incredible benefits of PTSD. It's quite fascinating. But any movement practice would do, in which you are developing a relationship to your body and can track shifts in triggered states. And sort of the three core stages of mindfulness here are intention, attention, and attitude. And that attitude being one of compassionate awareness. And intention obviously is a really key part in psychedelic therapy. And we go a bit more into depth in our longer courses on how to set an intention. But I think the key thing to remember is to set an intention of something you're seeking to move towards versus something you're moving away from. So it could be moving towards awareness, or to trust, let go, open is a great one. Or may I move with my most compassionate wisdom, whatever you're seeking to greater embody. And interoception is this idea that when something feels like we can't bear it, it can become more bearable if we stay with it in a moment-to-moment way. And developing interoception is the skill of doing that, becoming aware and trusting heartbeat, respiration, and being able to create shifts through, for example, breath work or self-soothing, passionate self-touch in our nervous system state. I think there's a few caveats to meditation when it comes to trauma, because some aspects could actually be re-triggering. So being really gentle with your practice, not being super strict when it comes to how you're sitting or which meditations you do, and having other people who meditate to potentially discuss anything that does arise with you. And I won't go too much into these, but I think the most helpful meditations, and research shows the most helpful meditations for trauma, is things like metta or loving kindness, compassionate based meditations, concentration meditations, visualizations such as future selves, ideal parents, creative imagining, Tonglen, which is a forgiveness or a kind of or a kindness based meditation, and a virtue based, exploring gratitude or impermanence, those aspects, whereas potentially things like non-dual meditations or open awareness can potentially be a little bit more challenging and triggering early on. So just sensing into what meditations would support you in your journey right now. And I might skip ahead a few. If you want to learn more about multiplicity and parts, you can do our longer sessions. Feel free to look that up on Signs of Life. But just this awareness that beneath the surface of the protective parts of trauma of survivors, there exists an undamaged essence, a self that is confident, curious, and calm, a self that has been sheltered from destruction by the various protectors that have emerged in the efforts to ensure survival. Once those protectors trust that it is safe to separate, the self will spontaneously emerge, and the parts can be enlisted in the healing process. I think it's quite interesting. I will say that in MDMA trials, there is an observed increase in part-related languages under the influence of MDMA, which was not mediated by therapist input, which I think is quite interesting.
No, I might, because we need to finish. So is it right if I just move to the forgiveness slide? Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can move that. That'd be great.
I will, yep, try and just do that.
So just briefly, should we forgive? Should we forgive the people that have hurt us, the systems, the structures, etc.? In the victim phase, forgiveness can actually be dangerous because the perpetrators aren't taking responsibility, and we're still open to being harmed, and blame is often directed towards you and away from the perpetrator. So in this stage, it's okay to be selfish. It's okay to prioritize you and have compassion for yourself, and just be aware that you're vulnerable in this space. And particularly people in the caring field, in the psychedelic space, they've been harmed because they've been trusting and they've been really forgiving. And it's really important to know your shadow. And for me, my shadow was actually my light. Too forgiving, too understanding, and now I have a red flag for that. Because boundaries are everything, and safety and self-respect. Forgiveness and compassion can come later when you're safe. Next, next slide. This is a little altar that I set up particularly when I was experiencing some narcissistic rage and stalking and a whole range of very distressing phenomena that went on the last couple of years, and it was going to destroy me. It was going to take away my joy and my compassion, and I set up this little altar in honor of the realm of the hungry ghosts. And I fed it mapacho, which is a plant spirit, which I've dieted on in the ayahuasca lineage, and strawberries for sweetness. And it was just my attempt of not letting that abuse take away my compassion for humanity and for suffering. And I really invite you, once you're, not in the victim's phase, once you're kind of out of the immediate danger, you can set up spaces, whether it's an altar, a ritual, and it's not about that person. It's about actually the field and the energy, and not taking on their abuse and not taking on their hate, and holding love and compassion for yourself, and sending that energy back, where it belongs. So, I really encourage in the integrator phase, you start to connect with multiplicity and archetypal experiences. And when things have gotten really tough for me and some of my clients, I get them to meditate on the fact that we were all babies. We were all children born into this vast, expansive, confusing mystery. And yeah, when it's really hard to hold compassion for an adult, particularly really sick, dangerous adult, or a system, or the many levels of abuse, when I trace it back to a baby, I drop into deep compassion and just deep, sadness, and also respect for the human experience that we're all a part of. And I just invite you to do the same when things get tough. Next slide.
To add there that there's, I think, different levels of forgiveness as well. There's a forgiveness where you wipe the slate clean, but there's also a kind of disentangling forgiveness where you disentangle yourself from a situation, which is an expression of your own inner freedom. And the quote on the previous slide was, forgiveness is a gift you give yourself.
Yeah, and also from a parts perspective, your adult might be able to have forgiveness and other aspects, but there might still be child parts, that are not there yet, and that's okay. So, we work from a whole system perspective, and just knowing your edges and knowing your soft spots, and particularly with family trauma, when we still have to see these people and we still love them, it's okay just to really honor that there's a part of you that hasn't forgiven and is, still battling with that family stuff. Yeah, I think just a couple more minutes, just highlighting nature-based therapies. Obviously, these are, my children, Northern Territory, and just art therapy and feeling into Indigenous wisdom there, and just me and Melissa having a ball on the beach, and just really how much time we spend at our computers and not moving our bodies and making ends meet, trying to pay our bills. I really encourage you just to survey your life, and where is there time and pockets for expansion and freedom with nature. Sitting in nature with a blank journal and listening to her and seeing what she says. What do you notice? What colours? What sounds? What is she saying to you? And, forest bathing, cold swimming, silent walking, fire, fire medicine is incredible, drumming. This is all here for us. A lot of it's free, and modernity really pulls us away from the natural world. And I just invite you to really bring her back in. Next. Again, this is my two best friends, Squish and Mushroom, praying at the altar. I caught them one day. Incredible. But again, when the world is getting you down, animals, incredible medicine. Setting up altar spaces for specific intentions. It might be an altar for your child part, an altar for the rage that you're feeling, an altar for, for your goals, a vision board, playing with the symbolic realm. Because what we know with psychedelics is if you just keep it cognitive, it doesn't land as well. There needs to be a symbolic representation, and whether that's through art, through journaling, dance, food, engaging all your senses will help engage the mystery. And then you start to see medicine everywhere. Then you don't need to go to ceremony all the time. You can, you walk out your door and the natural world is psychedelic. It's all here and it's available to us all.
One of the principles of post-traumatic growth therapy is actually helping an individual not just push towards and be driven towards growth, but to actually notice the growth that they already have and to be able to recognize it in the moment in their lives. So returning to simple appreciation for nature, for pets, for loved ones, for trees, for chocolate, whatever it is. And recognizing the personal strengths you've already cultivated, the new possibilities that are on the horizon, the relationships that have supported you thus far, and perhaps ones that are burgeoning or beginning, and also your capacity already for the growth you have achieved and moved through. And we really do have the capacity to turn off the autopilot of our nervous systems by entraining our awareness, stoking our inner fire, bringing light to our shadow, and over time liberating our self-agency. And psychedelics don't guarantee that, only we can. And it's our capacity to engage in landscapes of play, artful being, and connection that can allow us to curate our inner experience and improve the quality of our lives and the lives of those around us. Contrary to what we may have been taught to think, unnecessary and unchosen suffering wounds us, but need not scar us for life. It does mark us. What we allow the mark of suffering to become is in our own hands. A beautiful quote by Bell Hooks.
And we'll just finish on the medicine of the hummingbird, which is an incredible totem, incredible bird that would rather risk the chance of death than stay stuck, and each year travels very far in search of sweetness, in search of its treats. It migrates. It is able to travel up, down, backwards, forwards. It has huge power, huge direction. They don't understand scientifically how such a tiny bird can travel so far and move in so many directions. And it really is a metaphor for me with trauma. Do we stay stuck, or do we take the risks in search of that sweetness, and just trusting that we have all the directions and supports to carry us home to the sweetness of life has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Mm.
Melissa and Lani. And I'll get you to drop out of thank you very much. We've got some Q&A. Thank you very much to those who have dropped a question into the YouTube chat. It's a very very important topic. It's a very personal topic for people, and some have shared personal stories, and we appreciate that you feel comfortable sharing that in this space. So I'll bring up Melissa and Lani. We'll get to some of those questions. Hello. Thank you both. So our first question, there's a bit of a story with it, so I'll just read through the story first, and then there's a few questions. Some of these were asked earlier on, and some of those questions might have been addressed as we went along as well, but I'll read this out just as is. The question says, I've recently separated from a partner who seemed to have an entity or dark energy attached to him. He doesn't seem to know and is going to go on an ayahuasca journey soon. Is there a way for the organizers to detect that they may have a hitchhiker, which was put into the intentional quotes there by the question asker? I imagine that it could be dangerous for him and others if he were to open further and potentially let his unsavory energy into the deeper and the experience of others. Are there certain tests or procedures in place to prevent or discourage such people from entering a plant-based healing or ceremonial space? And that's the first question. There's a little bit here, but we'll see how you go.
Guess I can answer that. I guess my space, my passion is the ayahuasca field and deity lineage, and I guess it's a complex question because it depends on your phenomenology and your cosmology, what you believe personally. So some people that go to ceremony don't believe in entities; they believe in projections of the psyche and phenomena and myth and legends, etc. Other people very much believe in spirit entities attaching and attacking. So I guess it depends on your ex-partner's belief system, his capacity to be honest with the guides about his concerns, and hopefully the curanderos, ayahuasqueros are well versed in these realms. I mean, shamanic work is about the art of moving between the worlds, the light, the dark, and all of this tapestry. So in the jungle, this would be all part of it, and it's just whether our neo-shamanic containers are skilled enough to hold this. But whether it's a perceived entity or a part or an altar or a trauma body, it's really about, is it a safe container for him to be himself, and does he have the support to ground him, and skills and tools for compassion and being able to navigate those worlds. Do you want to add anything, Melissa?
I think that was answered beautifully.
Thank you. Further to that question, I told you there was a few parts here. How would you recommend that somebody like that be handled? Should that become evident during the experience?
Well, I guess if it's a shamanic setting, the curanderos will have a whole range of tools. They'll have their trance, they'll have their drum, they'll have mapacho, they'll have different tools and resources. It'd be very different in a clinical setting. So that's why it's really important when people apply for trials that they let their treating team know what their worldviews are, because if they do believe that there's entities and that there's this phenomena, is that treating team actually able to hold that and respond to it with the appropriate tools? But as you're mentioning, this situation with your ex-partner, it depends on if the curanderos are skilled enough to deal with that content with their tools, and that's where there's a bit of risk in Australia with potentially people who aren't attached to a lineage and years of training and mentoring to be able to hold those trance states. And that's why he needs to do his research into, is this container able to hold it, or are these new servers, who's their mentors, who's their training, do they have a blessing from a lineage to actually do this work? These are the type of questions that are really important.
Thank you. Another one, that's my face gone. If a person decided to have a microdose in a conscious attempt to move through their own trauma, and again, I think some of these questions have been answered as you've been speaking, but I'll ask it. What would the best dosage be?
I think it really depends on the medicine as well. And I think something to be aware of is microdoses of MDMA in trials actually showed just an activation of the nervous system and potentially actually negative effects versus positive effects, because the person became activated, didn't quite have the entheogenic effect there to actually be supported and feel safe. So just being, I think, quite careful of microdosing. I also, it's obviously something done that you do potentially alone or just moving through your life. So therefore, are the conditions in your life appropriate for microdosing? Are you living in a situation where you could experience a trigger environmentally or in your workplace or relationally with someone, with family? Just being really careful because psychedelics are enhancers, even on the microdose level. So I know people who have actually had a negative time microdosing because they went to work and work is stressful, whereas that going for a walk and spending the day doing yoga and meditating was more pleasant. So just, I think, being careful.
Yeah, well answered, Melissa. I think it was sort of mentioned as well during the talk that I think the line, actually, I copied a line out of there. Psychedelics are not therapies by themselves, but rather act as a catalyst for the therapeutic process. And I think Lani and Melissa started to go into a few of those different ones. Obviously, this presentation was longer than we had have time for tonight, but perhaps our next question. Sorry, I've got a lot here. If somebody wants to know about the work that you two are doing, where can they access that? Educational modules or things like that?
Yeah, so just the Signs of Life Psychology, which is, and if you Google my name or Melissa's name, we're pretty available on the internet as well in our various forms.
Excellent. Yeah, I've got that running down the bottom here as well. If you have a look, it is in there. There are 3 services, and I think I've got 2 of those services in the running bar again. But 3 services that would be good for people to turn to when they feel they need help, if they're suffering from abuse, if they're suffering from trauma. Where are the first 3 places that people should go?
Yeah, so there's 1-800-RESPECT, which deals with sexual violence as well as domestic violence. There's also the Sexual Assault Crisis Line, which I work on, which is for recent assaults. Of course, there's Lifeline. There's also Beyond Blue. And, a therapist, finding a really, really solid therapist. And there's, we have them on our team, and there's also other services, Enlightened Mental Health, and many people doing this incredible work. So having crisis response services as well as the long-term people that can support you more, long-term, important.
Another question from the YouTube chat. Thank you very much to all of those who have asked a question tonight. Which types of therapies do you find particularly effective in conjunction with psychedelics? What are the ones that really fit into that psychedelic psychotherapy model?
I think it depends if you're talking about the dose session. I think there's still a lot to learn about that. Non-directive approaches are really helpful in that space, so that people are given the capacity to expand and feel the medicine without too much top-down intervention. So that's where gentle IFS in the dose, somatic practices, no EMDR yet that we know of. We'd avoid that at this stage in the dose. But in the prep and integration, I guess it really depends on where they are in their journey. So in the 3 days after psychedelics, focusing on art therapies, somatic therapies, helping them stay with their felt sense. So emotion-focused therapy, great. And then as you move out of that kind of 3-day, 1-week window of being expanded, dropping more back into the narrative and narrative therapy, deeper parts work. People can do EMDR at that later stage of the month, particularly if there's traumatic memory that they're wanting to process through the eye movements or through butterfly taps as well. It's a gentle approach, and I'm just completing a 13-week EMDR and IFS course, so I'm learning to blend both of the protocols together. So I'm just feeling into how that goes. But I think the main thing is in the dose session, you don't want too much interference from a therapist. You want the medicine to do its work and the therapist to hold the container, and then don't rush into cognitive therapies in those early days in integration, because that will drop you too quickly into your ego. You want to stay in your body and your felt sense.
I have a policy question. I know we've been talking about therapy tonight, but obviously one of the caveats to all of this therapy is that the legal status of these substances is still in a highly scheduled field, and we know that there have been a few moves to reschedule, not just recently, but over some time. In fact, ever since these substances were scheduled in the first place. Oftentimes there were therapies that were happening at that time, and there were arguments to be made to not schedule them. The question is, what is your ideal vision for rescheduling MDMA and psilocybin in Australia, and what's your rationale?
So that's an interesting question in this climate. But I guess I feel like Oregon has a really interesting model where they've put together a team of experts, a consulting period of multiple years in which individuals with lived experience, therapists, pharmacologists, policymakers, lawyers, uh, more traditional uh, practices, as well as doctors, have come together to create the protocol and to create a process around psychedelic assisted therapies for the state. I think that expert consultation period and conversation period is really key. And it's something that hasn't really happened yet in Australia. But not only that, the last question when we discussed different therapies, we don't have a really clear consensus yet on, for each treatment indication, what is the appropriate preparation, what is the appropriate acute experience, what is the appropriate integration, and the varieties that could occur there. So there is a big role in research and developing a skill base and experience base in Australia for therapists. And currently, the only way to develop a experience base is through clinical trial work. So having multiple therapists in trials and then creating conversation through different multidisciplinary teams, I think is really key. And I think that would be the start of a process towards rescheduling.
Yeah, that word is multidisciplinary. How many syllables at once? We really appreciate your time tonight, both Melissa and Lani. There are a couple of other questions in there. I think a lot of these were answered in the talk, so maybe if you get a chance afterwards, you can rewatch this entire session. And as Lani has offered, check out the website, which is what was the website again? Sorry, I'm waiting for it to scroll across, but it's going to take a little bit. Thescienceoflife.com.au. That's all one word, thescienceoflife.com.au. And you can email both Melissa and Lani. To finish us off, though, maybe from both of you, we'd love to hear who you're most looking forward to seeing at EGA at Garden States in just 5 weeks' time. Who's on your top of your list?
I'm a bit of a dag. Mine's Melissa. So
Oh, it's really tempted to say Lani. But I also am really excited to see Suresh from New Zealand. Interesting microdosing research, and he has quite a critical thinking mind on things like placebos and how to structure trials. So that's always going to be a great conversation. Also, really love Margaret Ross's poetic and therapeutic perspective in her work with end-of-life anxiety. So, yeah, that's lots of things to be excited about.
And more being added all the time. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Melissa and Lani. We really appreciate it. And it's been a fantastic talk with a lot of generated discussion. And come along to Garden State so you can chat with Melissa and Lani in person. That's the best way. Thank you very much.
thank you.
everyone.
Stay connected. Bye.
And thank you for staying with us on tonight's final webcast before we head to Garden States on the first weekend of December, 2nd till 4th of December. And just a couple more bits and pieces about Garden States. I had a few. Our first one is Daily Grind, and I do have a Daily Grind's logo. I'll find that, but Daily Grind is supporting EGA and supporting Garden States, and they've rolled with South Australian skaters since 1996. Continue to be Adelaide's foremost family-owned skate and surf shop, focused on supplying the best products and knowledge in skate and surf, as well as providing the next generation with a nurturing environment to grow their skills. Based in Gilbert Street in Adelaide. I haven't been to Adelaide before. I've been through there once. I don't know where Gilbert Street is. So Adelaideans, please contextualise it for us. And also in McLaren Vale, both spaces provide an environment for skate, surf, and the arts to shine, whether it's skate trainings or the indoor mini ramp, skate, surf, movie premieres, bands, DJs, or art exhibitions. Daily Grind is a hub for it all. And gosh, I was listening to something the other day about one of these surf movies, one that came out not too long ago about some Australian surfers, one guy in particular who would surf up in WA about 1,000 kilometers away from Perth. Really in a much more remote area. I don't know how remote it is in WA. I'm not as familiar there, but the formation of the shoreline was just a recipe for disaster, a recipe for death, and this guy loved it. And it was really interesting, the parts of this documentary that I heard, because he was touching on these sorts of issues, on trauma, on his sort of relationship with this terrifying and really, you know, the kind of thing that challenges your ability to be alive the next day, and how the people around him were working with that as well. So that's my little surf trauma link. But you know, I suppose I've got a few friends that I know, maybe some tuned in tonight, that love their adrenaline-y experiences, and I just, like, I'm nervous I'm going to stub a toe on the door, and these people are doing things where, like, so many things can go wrong, but people love it. I'm sure maybe you love it. I don't know. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. I will finally show you. I don't think this is released yet, so this is a bit of a sneak peek. What we're looking at here is one of the resources that EGA offers, and there's a number that are already available on the EGA website, entheogenesis.org, or you can just head to gardenstates.org over there, and you'll be able to find the resources. And there's a number, as I said, already available, but this one will be available soon, or it might be already up there. Log in and have a look. San Pedro identification, and we've got 13 pages here, and I'll just, they're always beautiful productions. That is what EGA does, and we really appreciate if you have been able to support us during the microdose webcasts. It really helps us to not just do webcasts, but also to find the people that can put together things like this. It looks good. I've been wanting to know more about how to understand cacti identification, especially with these. There we go. The different Trichocereus. Trichocereus. Oh, look, that's another one of those words, isn't it? Pachinoi, Peruvianus. Sorry, Peruvianus. It's like Uranus. You gotta say it funny. And Bridgesai. What was that? We've got a helper. Peruvian. I saw different things in there, but yeah, great resource. Thanks very much for joining us. I'll just check in with oh, why? Oh, that's my voice coming back. That'll be you. That's our Zoom chats double connecting me. Oh no, there he goes again. That's you, Lee.
Is that me?
Yeah. Must be late on a Thursday. Thank you very much. There are a few tickets left. Grab one if you haven't grabbed one. There will be more announcements, I'm sure, on the lead up to the event. So make sure that you're connected with us on the newsletter, because you'll receive updates there. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your company. We will be back with more webcasts in 2023, but for now, it's all hands on deck for Garden States, and we'll see you in a month's time. Bye-bye.